System is still buffering, folks. We're just waiting to go live. Good morning, everyone. It's 9:31. I'd like to welcome everybody to this Committee of the Whole meeting for the Cowichan Valley Regional District for today's date being Wednesday, April 13th. I'd like to begin, as always, by acknowledging that we are gathered virtually and electronically on various portions of the traditional and ancestral territories of Coast Salish First Nations. With that, I'd like to call the meeting to order, and our first item of business is a motion to approve the agenda. I don't believe there's any late items from staff. Does anybody on the board have a late item? I see Director Nicholson raise your hand.
Just want to move it.
Councillor Marsh, is that a late item or a second? You're muted, ma'am.
It could be both.
Okay. So the adoption of the agenda has been moved and seconded. All in favor? And opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. Ms. Ferguson.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
Director Acton is trying to get in, just to let you know.
Okay.
She's having problems.
IT is aware. They will reach out to her.
Mr. Chair,
Director Marsh.
this is the both. I just wondered if you were going to do a similar thing as you did yesterday, given former Director Seymour sat 9 years at this board table.
I hadn't actually prepared anything for this meeting because this is Committee of the Whole. I think it's more appropriate if that's to be done, that's done at the board level rather than at Committee of the Whole. But for everyone's information, in case you're not aware, former North Cowichan Councillor George Seymour passed away 2 days ago. And we paid tribute to him last night at a meeting we had, a budget meeting at North Cowichan. As Director Marsh has indicated, he spent 9 years on this board. We live with many of his legacies, including the reserve fund for the Cowichan District Hospital Board, which was used to purchase the property and which continues to be used on an ongoing basis for capital expenditures there. He certainly had the foresight to convince this board of the day to set that up, and we're very thankful for that, and we express condolences to the family.
So, Mr. Chair, if I just might let Chair Yanni Darnado know that I sent the press release to her in case she would like to do that at 1:30.
All right, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Ms. Ferguson, let's move on to the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item on the agenda is the adoption of the minutes, and the recommendation before you is that the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of March 23rd, 2022 be adopted.
Can I have a mover and seconder? Thank you. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all in favor and opposed, that carries. Ms. Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is business arising from the minutes. There is none. And then public input period, and we have no applicants.
All right.
Mr. Chair, just as a matter of courtesy, I think it's Miss Harrison.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wrote it down wrong. Yes, you're right. You should have corrected me. Thanks. All right, moving on then to correspondence. Number 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item C1, correspondence from the town of Ladysmith regarding the Cowichan Valley Regional District Bylaw number 39, Fireworks Sale and Discharge Regulation Bylaw 1970, and that is for direction.
And I will give the floor to Director Stone because this comes from his jurisdiction. Director Stone, would you like to speak to this correspondence?
Thank you. Obviously, I think the correspondence is quite clear. There's obviously on our agenda today more discussion around the fireworks regulation within the CVRD and the uncertainty that's been created over the last couple of years around community events. While this discussion around fireworks is in flux, led our council to request that we be permitted to do our own bylaw to manage the sale and discharge of fireworks within the municipality. So that's there for consideration by the board. And I think that we would continue to pursue other community celebration features, if you will. But at this time, preliminary investigations show that both due to the proximity of the airport and the cost, that other suggested alternatives to fireworks are not suitable at this time. But we would continue to support the exploration of alternative celebratory activities for community celebrations, but would like the authority to determine the use of fireworks and other related items within our municipal jurisdiction.
I have a procedural question, I guess, for Ms. Harrison, and that's, how does Ladysmith get out of the Cowichan Valley Regional District bylaw number 39? Is it a simple motion to be passed by a majority of the board? Microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is a approval process that's involved with that in the same sense that it was when it was established. So we would have to have a consent, 2/3 consent of the directors. If we don't have that, then we're looking at a service review.
Okay.
An official service review application through the province.
I didn't think it could be as simple as a majority vote. Director Stone.
So if the board was willing, I'd just like to refer this to staff at this time for a report back on what the options are. And I have other, I think, points around the discussion that's later in the agenda, so I don't want to confuse the two issues. Obviously, there's a lot of work and discussion going on into fireworks discharge within the region. And I think that we'll save that part of the discussion for there, just recognizing that the majority of issues created with fireworks are people that are already contravening the existing bylaw. And we'll cover those subjects, but in this moment, I would just ask for a motion to refer to staff to report back on options to discuss this request.
So you've made that motion. Director Salmon has seconded. Any discussion on the motion to refer? Director McGonigal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And with that referral, I would like clarification on the Town of Lake Cowichan's fireworks bylaw 807-2005, which is implemented within the town, but shows also within the CVRD bylaw that we reside in that. If that is dual administration, I think that should be clarified as well.
Turn to staff. Do we need a clarification on the motion, or is that understood that this report that'll come back will touch on both? It's understood. Thank you, Director McGonigal. Anybody else? Seeing none on the motion to refer. All in favor? And opposed? That carries. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item on the agenda is information, and item IN1 is correspondence from the City of Duncan regarding bid application for the 2024, 2025, or 2026 55 and over BC Games, and the recommendation is for information.
All right, this item generally comes up in the next item, the first report from Community Services, so I'm not sure we need to discuss this, and I don't see anybody here from the City of Duncan. Oh, Director Staples is here. I'm sorry. I don't know, you were off on the bottom of my screen somewhere. Did you want to speak to this, Director Staples?
I think it speaks for itself. It's just that the city, we had a discussion about what the value of having games in the past and what it's brought to our community, and wanted to encourage the CVRD to make the application, which is the next topic. So
Any other discussion on the correspondence? Seeing no hands, we will move on. Ms. Harrison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item on the agenda is reports. Item R1 is a report from the General Manager, Community Services Department regarding the 55 and over BC Games bids for 2024, 2025, and 2026. And the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that the invitation to bid on the 2024, 2025, or 2026 55 and over BC Games be declined.
Thank you very much. Before I entertain a motion, I think perhaps Mr. Elzinga would want to give a very brief overview of why he's recommending what he has, and I know it's in the report, but John, can you just quickly articulate what's behind this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through to the committee. As Director Staples outlined, these events have tremendous value for our community, and it is with reluctance that I put this recommendation forward. But this is the consensus, not only of CVRD staff, but municipal staff in North Cowichan and Ladysmith, that there is just a capacity issue to look at this invitation at this time.
All right, with that, somebody want to make the recommended motion or perhaps a different motion? Director Smith, seconded by, is that to speak or that's a motion and seconder? All right. Any further discussion on the motion that's before us, which is that the invitations be declined? I'll start with Director Staples, then Marsh.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to recognize I completely understand the capacity issues and everything else, and I look forward to when the CVRD is back in a place where we can look forward to doing the next one. And I just want to acknowledge, John. I've been involved in many of the events that size and capacity that you have been one of the key players in, and just acknowledge all the work that you have done. And yeah, as you said, it's an incredible experience. It brings so much to the community, and the next few years, I believe we'll get to a place where we can do that again. And so I look forward to the next time.
Thank you, Director Staples. Director Marsh.
Director Staples covered everything I was going to say. Thank you.
Director McGonigal.
Thank you very much. A very difficult decision, I'm sure. We all have seen the legacies that have been left by previous games that have been hosted throughout the region. But I think what this shows is a good level of governance where we're making the decision on the information, the best information that we're provided by our professional staff. And when the capacity is back to a full complement, perhaps again we could revisit an opportunity in the future.
Thank you, Director McGonigal. Any other hands? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question on the motion that we decline the invitation to bid on these games. All in favor of the motion? And opposed? That carries, I believe, unanimously. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is R2. It's a report from the Economic Development Division regarding Vancouver Island Coast Economic Developers Association's Circular Economy Project. And the recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board that $10,000 be allocated from Function 121, Economic Development Cowichan 2022 budget to participate in the Vancouver Island Coast Economic Developers Association's Circular Economy Accelerator Program.
That's moved by Councillor Marsh, seconded by Director Acton. Sorry, I'm getting my honorifics mixed up here. Discussion. Director Marsh.
Yeah, I just hope that we will all support this. It ultimately, when we get to a place of a circular economy, will save us a lot of money and waste, as well as generate income for our citizens and jobs for our citizens. So I'm really excited that the CVRD is, and Mr. O'Riordan, I see he's popped up. Maybe he wants to say something. I'm really excited that they're bringing this forward, and I encourage us to support it because in the long term, it's the way we're all going. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. O'Riordan's popped up. Did you have something to add to the discussion, sir, or are you just here in case we need you?
I'm just here in case you need me. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Director McGonigal, or not Morrison, I'm sorry.
Don't call me McGarrigle. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious. I fully support the concept. I'm just wondering around the funding and note your role in the organization, Mr. O'Riordan. This obviously has some relationship with how we deal with, I'm sure, our solid waste and the like. So is there, interdepartmental synergies that will arise from, your connections with our solid waste? And the other question that I was asking, you're seeking funds from different organizations. You've obviously come to the regional district. Is there approaches being made to individual municipalities as well? And are there same sort of presentations and requests for funds being made to electoral areas also?
Mr. O'Riordan.
Thank you for the questions through the chair. Yes, in terms of connections with solid waste, you're right to point out that. I think this is kind of the alignment that we all need in terms of alignment with climate change, the needs of business, and our waste management strategies. And I have been in contact with our waste management division, and they're supportive of this initiative. In terms of reach out to municipalities, a letter of request for financial participation in this program went out to all the CAOs in the region through Viceda, and North Cowichan was the one who responded to that for additional information, and so we took up that call in terms of providing additional information and supporting a staff report that went into that.
All right. Anybody else? Questions? I'm not seeing any hands, so I'm going to call the question on the motion. All in favor? And opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. Ms. Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next item is R3. It's a report from the Inspections and Enforcement Division regarding the fireworks discharge permits, and this item is for direction.
Thank you very much. I see Mr. McDonald has popped up. The report that's before us has a couple of options. One is to amend the bylaw to special events only. That's the recommended option. Actually, it's not. It's either one or the other. There's no staff recommendation. It's for direction. The other is outright prohibition. Director Stone to start. Actually, why don't we start with staff? Mr. McDonald.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a short presentation if the board wishes, but I'll leave that up to you.
What's the will of the board? I think a short presentation would be in order, just to refresh our memories. Go ahead, sir.
So what I thought we'd do is just do a quick presentation as a refresher of Bylaw 39, which is one of our oldest bylaws that goes back to, I think, 1970. This bylaw applies to all 9 electoral areas, which is also including the town of Ladysmith and also town of Lake Cowichan, which was correct that they actually do have their own bylaw, but it actually is superseded by bylaw number 39. And at the time, Duncan and North Cowichan had chosen not to be included in the bylaw. The current bylaw prohibits all sales of fireworks and does restrict to discharging to just 3 specific dates, which was January 1st, July 1st, and October 31st. Did allow for special quest dates, but all those would have to be approved by the board. And one of the last changes that was made to this bylaw a few years back was the not allowed to discharge in a permitted area of 500 meters of livestock. We currently have for fines is $250 for discharging and $750 for illegal sales. since the last meeting, there was quite a bit of public opinion came in. So I personally received quite a few phone calls and emails, both for and against. And what I did is I just did a little clip from Facebook, and I've deleted some of the names on there, but you can see that they were quite variety, from everything saying, "My dog thanks you," to no one's allowed to have any fun anymore. So that was typically the kind of responses we're getting. On that Facebook page, there was probably, I believe it went over 100 responses, so it was quite popular. So some of the biggest complaints we had were the effect on animals. In fact, the SPCA ran a petition, and they got over 14,000 people to respond, and that was sent to the federal government, and they were looking for an outright ban Canada-wide. What I also decided to include in this slide is that's actually my own dog, who is actually terrified of fireworks. And actually last New Year's, we thought the poor little guy was going to have a heart attack. So just one little personal addition to that. So I did include, although it's 4 direction, I did put some options on the table. Option 1 would be to remove all permits for personal use. Now, bit of a history, I believe a number of years ago this was brought forward before. However, they decided to keep personal use in. Another thing would be required for whoever was going to set the fireworks off to have the proper certifications. Also suggesting to remove specific dates, as all would at this point be have to be approved by the board anyway. This does still allow for some flexibility, so it's not a total outright ban. The suggestion would be to have public notice, so that they have to either put it in the paper, or if there was going to be an event, that all the public would know when it is and where it was going to be and how long it would be. This is a similar model already adopted by Vancouver, and I also believe Victoria. Option 2 is entertaining for the outright ban. And through this one, this would take the pressure off. I believe the last one that came forward to the board was Brentwood Bay. So this would take the pressure off the board having to make those kind of difficult decisions. This option may be also more appropriate for rural areas. And also, as we've talked before, there are other options nowadays for display events such as laser shows and drones. A third option would be to do a regional approach, and this would be where we invite all municipal councils to participate in development of a joint bylaw that's recognized by all. And some options there would be just the inclusion of Duncan and North Cowichan, possibly a prohibition of all CVRD, or that could be just joint rules of all CVRD. Another thing would be a collaboration and advocacy to senior governments to advocate for certain things, like, say, the outright ban of sales across Canada as well. Optional amendments for consideration, which I also put in here, were maybe specifying geographical areas where discharges would be acceptable, maybe increasing the minimum distance to livestock, maybe up to 1 kilometer, and even just simply removing July 1st because of the summer. Now, another thing would be, again, I just reiterate, these ones were the public awareness. So just basically notifying residents, because that was something in complaints I'd gotten, that people didn't know they were going to happen in certain areas. And also, I've reiterated this advocate to senior government level. So this is maybe something that maybe we want to consider no matter what options you choose. I've also stuck in option 4 on this slide, and because some things changed due to the correspondence and even some things I've heard earlier in the meeting. So one option is we take no action. But from what I'm hearing, one would be to amend the bylaw to remove Town of Ladysmith. But I also put question mark on Lake Cowichan, because I believe because they had their own bylaw, they may have wanted to consider the same path that Town of Ladysmith is going down. And I'm here for questions.
Thank you very much, sir. And Director Stone had his hand up before we turned to staff for that report, so I'll start with Director Stone.
Thanks. I just have a few questions and a comment. Obviously, the fireworks issue is prevalent everywhere in the region. specifically leading up to and following celebratory dates on the calendar. And I think it just is really important to note that the main issue with fireworks is discharge outside of permitted dates and without permits. That happens the weeks leading up to like nightly, in the weeks leading up to celebratory dates, and in the days and weeks sometimes following, particularly around Halloween, Canada Day, et cetera, et cetera. And yet we have an inability to enforce on those violations at this time that I've seen, because they consistently happen with either no recourse or nothing has been done over the last 7 years we've lived out here to limit it. And frankly, the majority of those are within my electoral area here in and around the Diamond, just a few doors down and around the area. And we've dealt with it basically by keeping our dog inside. And I agree with it and respect that the impacts that these long duration events night after night have on livestock and pets. At the same time, I know in our previous discussion, we had asked about engaging with the local First Nations to see what their willingness was to either suspend the sale of fireworks. And I'm not sure that that's been discussed as part of these recommendations today. And just noting that things like laser shows and drones, I was just wondering if staff had engaged with the airport to find out the availability of alternatives like that in proximities to airports. I know laser shows are somewhat frowned on, but may be possible. But the question I have to staff was, what was the airport's feedback on alternative measures such as drones and laser shows?
Mr. McDonald, have we done some research on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, staff did not further up on that research.
Okay, so I just want to be clear that that's not been looked into, but it's been proposed as an alternative without investigation into the viability of that as an alternative. And I think that there's some discussion here that is merited discussion, and that is perhaps in the more urban areas, the municipalities could regulate fireworks within their boundaries as they feel appropriate, and in the more rural areas where there's more livestock that may be affected, that if that's the desire of the electoral areas to have an outright ban, that they look at it. But I just think that we're possibly moving too quickly towards an outright ban when the enforceability of the ban doesn't seem within our grasp, and we may not have consulted with the nations who are permitting the sale and discharge of fireworks just across our borders. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Stone. And that's fundamentally where I land on this. The recommendation that I kind of liked was the regional approach. I think it's option 3, but I would group into that the notion that we do more consultation with First Nations, because until we address the issue of the sale of those fireworks, and the sale is happening on First Nations, I see it on Halalt, I see it when I drive by the old Ivy Green Park and various other places. I know it's happening down in Mill Bay. We have no jurisdiction there. People buy the fireworks, load them in their trunk, and cross the line, and they're back in the CBRD, or they're in North Cowichan, or they're in wherever they are, and they set them off. We don't have the capacity to enforce if we don't find a way to deal with this at the source. In terms of the sales, we can make all the noise we want here, and that's probably a bad term to use in the context of fireworks, but we can ban all we want. But the reality is, if it's unenforceable and the sales continue, we're basically blowing in the wind. This has to be addressed at source, and we've talked for a long time about, and we do a lot of good work in terms of engaging with local First Nations, and this is an issue that I think we need to engage them on and say, you know what, it's an issue for us, it's an issue for your people with pets, etc. Can we deal with this? And until we do that, I'm not sure that we're going to get much else done. Director Toporowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're talking about the source. I know some people that go down to the States and buy them down in the States. So, pointing out and individual reserves is not appropriate. But I do wish that we do talk to them about, this. And there are community members that do not want fireworks set off in their in their region, just like ours. They're our neighbors. So I just caution you on your wording, on pointing that out about accusing or blaming. So I just wanted to point that out. It was very hard for me to not say anything about that. But I know, I see there's roadside sales towards Ladysmith, and it's often a corner somewhere, and it could be someone's property that's, gave a sale of leasing a piece of property or their end of their driveway. It's, those are some of the things that we face as a nation of bylaws as well. So it would be really good to have one bylaw. And my other thing that I wanted to say was, I'm in favor of option 3 also in removing Ladysmith and Lake Cowichan from that. When I read the report, I was wondering why Ladysmith was still in there when North Cowichan and Duncan weren't. So, but then I heard from Director McGonigal about Lake Cowichan as well, and so I'm just those things as well. I think those were the only things that I had written down. Thanks.
Thank you, and I want to apologize. I mean, my tone was wrong. You're right. Some of this stuff is coming from completely outside the jurisdiction, but we're seeing the signs, every Halloween and New Year's and stuff along the highway when you drive even through North Cowichan, directing folks fireworks for sale here. And the point is, wherever it is, we need to find a way to address that sales issue. Director Yana DiNardo, then Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Being the no fun maker right now, and also being a regional thinker. I mean, and we're modernizing our OCPs in our electoral areas, and modernizing means we have to change some things. And this 1970 bylaw, number 39, is one that needs to change. And it needs to change. And I would be supporting option 2, with also advocating to other levels, senior levels of government. We've been asked from RCMP. I remember when I was sitting on the board, it was Cowichan Tribes that has worked with us. That was only Cowichan Tribes at that time that was asking for us to put a ban, and we worked together with them. Change is hard, and I'm not sure if the animals are different in Ladysmith and Lake Cowichan than they are here. And I really find that enforcement in these rural areas and trying to enforce this is just literally impossible. So, you really have to be forward thinking, and we have to change, and we have to change together. And I think that this is our opportunity. It's never easy. It's never easy to say, like I just did, and I'm no fun maker. We used to have fireworks. I did it all the time here. We did it in Lambourne. We had all kinds. But now, like I said it again, I'm a broken record. When we know better, we have to do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Yana DiNardo. I've got Morrison, Acton, Marsh, Salmon, and Stone wants round 2. We'll see if anybody gets in before him for round 2. So, Director Morrison.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not even going to get into the sourcing issue. I think if people want to get their hands on fireworks, they're going to get their hands on fireworks. If you're supposed to be, I don't know if it's 19 or 18 or 21 to get fireworks. Most of the people I see running around at night setting off fireworks are nowhere near that age. So, if people want to get them, they're going to get them. I absolutely understand the plight of pet owners. For some reason, my dog isn't bothered in the least by them, but I know of many people in community that are, just fearful for, as Mr. McDonald had said with his shot of his cute dog there, they're just fearful for the lives of their beloved family members. I can see the notion of our municipal partners having this debate within their boundaries and deciding yay or nay on this, and all the power to them, and I'm more than willing to accede to, you know, what their desires are around this. I don't want to be, I got an earful on the weekend about the no fun CVRD, and it seems to be true to some extent, but I think that I don't want to be involved in something that's going to be a complete ban in the region that will frustrate the desires of the people within municipal boundaries that want them. I also think about helping our bylaw folks out and helping the RCMP out. There's not just the domesticated livestock and domesticated pets, but there's all of the other flora and fauna out there that are affected by fireworks, and so I can see the electoral areas having this discussion at EASC, and perhaps coming forward with a resolution that perhaps did ban all of the sale, discharge of fireworks in electoral areas. But that would be a discussion that I'd like to have with my colleagues at EASC, and so I don't know if that's helpful or not. I don't want to be a no fun director and a no fun board member, but I think that giving folks, especially the younger folks, access to be able to see a fireworks display is something that I'd be interested in doing. May not want to do it in my jurisdiction, though. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Morrison. Acton, Marsh, Salmon, and Nicholson. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo some of the same points made by Director Morrison. I would also like to support something that has a little bit more balanced, where we don't allow private events, just someone at the end of a cul-de-sac, and a bit more of an education program. I think some of these larger events that the whole community can benefit from is something that we could entertain with permits coming forward. So I think there's just so many mixed views on this. I don't know how we move forward on this, except for the electoral areas perhaps going on their own and deciding which way to go with this as rural areas.
Thank you. Director Marsh.
Thank you. It's really hard to.
Thank you. Are you
Sorry.
waiting for me to speak some more?
I'm speaking. I'm trying to choose my words carefully. I'm along the lines of Chair Yanni DiNardo. Although I really struggle with the Ladysmith thing because they do them professionally and on the water, they're not likely to cause a fire, although I'm sure they do cause some pets to be upset. But I think that, it's my understanding that it's coming up later, but there was a decision made because of people smoking in a park in Saltaire that they couldn't play ball there. So why are we letting off fireworks in a valley that is full of forest, full of ways of catching on fire? And I would say that affects everyone. But as I said, I struggle with the Ladysmith, probably partly because I have fond memories of my kids growing up there on the beach at the end of the weekend and watching the fireworks. But I do believe that when we're going to deal with an issue like this, it should be uniformly done throughout the region. And so maybe the answer is to, if someone wants to opt out, I don't know. But I feel really quite strongly that, even though we're in a heat dome, somebody's going to set off fireworks around July. And, we all pay for, in our health and in the health of our ecosystems, for fires that could spread really widespread. I mean, it's not too far of a stretch to believe that in our lifetimes we could have a catastrophic fire that similar to some of the California and the interior fires. So I guess I'll just end by saying for 25 years, I've been trying to get at schools, not lately, haven't had kids in school, but helium balloons. Like, let's stop getting helium balloons and now stand up and let them go up in the air so that the fish can eat them and die. And we're still doing that. And so at some point you have to just be the fun killer and say, find another way to have fun that isn't at the expense of our forests, our pets, our people with PTSD, our livestock and wild creatures. So I guess I'm with Lori, with Ms. Director Yanni DiNardo. I think it's time. I think it's past time, actually. And there's a lot of other ways to have fun.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Director Salmon, then Nicholson.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm also on the side of a ban, and I won't reiterate, but not only the animals, but the environment, and just generally the way society is moving, and we can choose to lead or not. But I do have a question just for Mr. McDonald. If we did go to a ban in the electoral areas, what would the implications be for your enforcement?
Mr. McDonald, is it enforceable, and what's the implications?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is difficult to enforce as trying to find people. By the time we get to where they're setting them off, even through personal experience, I had them up by my place and I tried to catch the people, and by the time I got there, they were gone. So it is difficult, and actually I think the real problem is the accessibility.
Maybe, thank you. Just to reframe the question a bit, is there any value in the simplicity of a ban from the enforcement point of view?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, actually I believe there would be. If it's an outright ban, then we just know everywhere that somebody sets it off that it's not allowed.
Okay, thank you.
But is it still enforceable? Even if they set it off and it's not allowed, by the time you get there, the fireworks have blown up, and how do you prove it was them? I mean, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here. Does it help with the enforcement piece?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if we receive complaints, we can take those complaints and the witnesses. So if a neighbor sees it going off in a backyard and is willing to let us know that and testify to that, then we could go after that person.
Thank you.
Sorry, follow-up, Director.
Go ahead, Director Salmon.
The other thought, I'm just wondering about the message to the sellers. If there was an outright ban, I think it's a little simpler on the just on the general, anyone that's selling to know that it's banned in the area might be disincentive.
Fair enough. Director Nicholson, Martman McGonigal. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. And basically, I was going to ask enforcement the same question that Director Salmon did. But I would like also to point out that I did get a call this week about someone in Salem who has been letting fireworks off for the last couple of weekends. And people have given up trying to get bylaw, trying to contact bylaw or the RCMP. So, you know, I get that it's difficult to enforce, but I think maybe we should look at how we can improve our enforcement of things like that, because it is a struggle in the rural areas, I think, with livestock and wildlife and the environment in general to continue with fireworks. Thank you.
Director Martman.
Thank you. And I appreciate all the comments, and I think they reflect a time that that a change is needed, but the change is not actually in the policy; it's actually in the behavior of people in the community, so that the discharge of fireworks is managed in a way that is safe and respectful to all neighbors. And I think no matter what policy gets put in place here, that we are faced with it not being enforceable. And that's essentially what I'm hearing. And when you do that, then I think the issue is around education and change of behavior. And, you know, and including mine, like in terms of, you know, fireworks were a big part of our life when our kids were growing up. And so, you know, how do I accept that and say, well, this decision here to prohibit or to make a change with no enforcement is an effective way to go. So I guess I would look and support the regional approach with the idea that we are moving to prohibit. That is the direction that we're going in the long term, and get the education out there and find a way from a regional approach to do it, because quite frankly, I'm not sure I knew electoral area boundaries more than 2 years ago, and where they were and where the town of Ladysmith started or didn't start. And that people do understand they're part of the CVRD. And so I think that whatever we do should be across the CVRD and be clear, consistent, and with the idea that we will educate and educate and educate. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Martman. Director McGonigal.
Thank you very much. First of all, just want to thank Mr. McDonald for the clarification on the dual bylaws that reside within the town of Lake Cowichan. I believe that was an oversight when 847/2005 was implemented. I believe the intent was for jurisdiction within the town exclusively, but having the bylaw 39 precede our own bylaw is dual administration, in my opinion. And I want to reassure Director Yanni DiNardo that the animals in the West are no different than the animals in Cowichan Bay. All animals here don't have webbed feet just because we have lots of rain. But I tend to agree with Director Martman that education is the process similar to the recycling program that is so successful now. And the buy-in from the education process that we have come to at this time was a result of constant education, whether it was through the school system or through advertisement. So total ban, I am sure, is unenforceable. It's probably unacceptable to some people. I do know that even last night within our area, fireworks were going off, and my animals did not appreciate that either. But within special events with special permitted professionals for special occasions, I don't have a concern with that. So I would be more inclined to number 3 within the staff report, and look forward to further discussion.
Okay, I'm not seeing any further hands. Director Staples. I was just going to say I haven't heard from Staples, Smith, Kuhn, or Wilson, so I want to give them an opportunity. And Director Stone, I already have you on the list for the start of round 2. Director Staples.
Yeah, I think the idea of moving towards something, I support option 3 as well, but there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of, thinking of how these types of things, as Director McGonigal was just saying, have been done before, reaching out to other, others' jurisdictions within our region, and having a process set in place, much like we've done Airshed and other things, to establish what this actually looks like and how we can do this together, because it's not going to happen overnight. And as we start to do that work, parallel work around the education that has been discussed, I think that that's really the only way we can move forward with this. And in a number of years, we'll look back and things will have changed, because that's how things like this that we all grew up appreciating and loving, without recognizing the consequences, how those things do change. And so it's a huge behavior change. And I know that a lot of things that have changed in my lifetime, it has not taken away the fun. It has just changed the way that things are appreciated, and changed the types of things that are appreciated. And I believe that this will happen at the end of all of this as well. It's just getting through it. When there's just so many variables right now. But I believe that we can get there, and I do support moving towards a full ban.
Thank you, Director Staples. I've got Wilson and Smith. Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, there's a lot of good points brought up here, and one of the things that really concerns me as well, I've posted, and the board knows that this, I've forwarded the effects not just on animals but birds as well. The light effects that these fireworks have on the migration of birds and other other animals is quite amazing. One of the things that I've not heard mentioned yet is the effect that it has on very large animals, such as horses and that kind of thing. Some of the pictures that we've seen posted are just horrific. You cannot, you can try and comfort a 50 or 60 or 100 pound dog. Try and comfort a 1,000 pound or more horse or something of that size. It's not going to happen. One of the other things is enforcement that's come up. Yes, it is a very difficult thing when you compare that to, for instance, the enforcement that the RCMP and our police departments have to do on, let's say, road safety. They're not going to catch everybody, even with the resources they have. And we've all seen that, people blatantly breaking the law and getting away with it because the enforcement, even of an organization of that kind, is not in place. And I truly sympathize with the job that Mr. McDonald and his bylaw people have. It's an almost impossible job. I'll leave it at that, but basically I have concerns here about the animals, the birds, and everything else that goes with it, not just from noise, but from light effects as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wilson. Director Smith.
Thank you. This brings a thought into my mind that when we sit here, we consider bylaws very seriously, and we don't make decisions lightly. It takes a group here looking at all the different angles, changes that may be required, how the impact is. It's important to look at all the good points that have come forward. I find that since the COVID canceled the Halloween event in Saltaire, we have had so many more infringements upon the bylaw that you require a permit. So it's hard to say if we bring back an event, will it stop that? And I also have concerns about the chemicals that are involved in fireworks and that they go into the ground, the birds eat them. So I do feel that education may be our first option, but I also would like to see towards banning, and I support that direction at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Smith. Director Kuhn, you haven't spoken yet. Do you have anything to add to the discussion before I start round two?
Yes, I'm more on kind of an easygoing way. I can't see an outright ban. I don't think it would ever work. I think it should be left to the individual areas. Take my area. We don't have livestock. Yes, now and then somebody shoots off a pistol or whatever, and they have a little bit of firework. It happens now and then. As far as I'm concerned, it's not a big problem. What we should consider is this is not like it's taking place every weekend. I mean, how many times do we have fireworks go off? If you add it up, it's probably, I don't know, maybe 10 days. I don't know if we should blow that up into such a huge problem. Like I hear about pollution, I hear about this. Man, there's all kinds of other sources of pollution or noise. Take motorbikes or take loud motorboats. I mean, what are we going to do? We can't solve all the problems. And as far as I'm concerned, it should be left up to the individual areas. And I certainly wouldn't be part of an outright ban. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Kuhn, and I appreciate that where you live, it's maybe a few days a year, but I can tell you that where I live, it's almost every weekend. That's just the reality. Director, we'll start round two. Director Stone and Marsh so far, and Yanni DiNardo. Director Stone.
Thanks. So I just was taking notes during the discussion, and it consistently comes back to lack of enforcement. So the existing bylaw, most of the issues that we're having is people who are not adhering to the existing bylaw. I can accept and I appreciate, and I don't necessarily disagree with looking towards a long-term ban on fireworks everywhere all the time. But I will note that we're not enforcing the bylaw that we have right now. We're unable to. And if you look at jurisdictions that have a lot more capacity than we do, like the city of Vancouver, ban fireworks going into 2021. And although they said there was a reduction, sounds from our East Vancouver neighborhood, you wouldn't know there was a ban, was one of the councillors tweeting on Saturday night, the night before Halloween last year. And they said that although it's prohibited, the sale and use of fireworks November 1st, 2020 and 2021, there were still significant calls for service, and the police and the bylaw said they were unable to attend to those complaints because they were otherwise busy. And I just think we're setting ourselves up to create an expectation that's not enforceable. We're not able to enforce the current bylaw. And yet we're talking about expanding the reach of that bylaw to outright ban. And I think that'll just drive more people sort of underground, if you will, recognizing that they know as well as most that there's an unenforceability there. On Halloween night or on big nights, RCMP aren't going to be disposed to chase down fireworks for the same reason that our bylaw enforcement staff already indicated, that they can't make it there before the offense is over. So, you know, it's just the practicality of an outright ban. I would think that if community celebrations were allowed to proceed, you might see somewhat of a reduction of the illegal discharge on those nights. But, you know, I think that's all just speculation. I think the only real thing that I can see out of this discussion is that we're not able to currently enforce the existing bylaw. And I just have reservations about creating an expectation that we can't deliver on when we can't deliver on the expectations set by our existing bylaw.
Thank you, Director Stone. Marsh, then Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As was mentioned earlier, it's difficult to enforce speeding. And I just want to end by something that our former director and longtime chair, Hutchins, educated our Cowichan table about. It took 10 years to get general buy-in to seatbelts. When that was brought in, I still bet that there are people that don't use seatbelts, and that can't be enforced. But I think that that's part of education, is to say, we've outgrown this. We know better now. We're not going to do this. And sure, there will be things that happen where bylaw certainly can't get there. However, I'll just end with one light. I think I shared this anecdote here or at North Cowichan. A year ago on Halloween, one of my neighbors was setting off fireworks, and I was coming home from something. Actually, I heard it. I went driving to see where it was. And another neighbor who works for a vet was on her way down from having words with this person. So I stopped, heard her. She was very upset. Stopped at the fireworks place and just the house and just said, you know, I happen to have my North Cowichan logo on. So she probably thought I was staff, but you know, you can't do these without a permit. Do you have a permit? No, we don't have a permit. And they did stop. So I guess I'm saying, I think that you have to start, and just because you're not going to get 100% compliance, maybe ever, is no reason not to aim for doing the best thing for all of the reasons that we've said up till now. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Marsh, Director Yanni DiNardo, and then I'm going to put myself back on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to try and move option 2, but I'd also like to add that we advocate senior levels of government as well on that. I move option 2 with also advocating to senior levels of government.
So the motion then would be that it be recommended to the board that CVRD fireworks bylaw number 39 be amended to prohibit all fireworks within CVRD electoral areas, Town of Ladysmith and Town of Lake Cowichan, and excluding First Nations reserves, and further that the board advocate to senior levels of government for a total ban on the sale and discharge of fireworks. Would that be, or the importation and sale of fireworks, I think is what you're looking for. That's the motion?
Yeah, but I also think that, I don't know if it needs to be in the motion, that we still support and advocate and help our neighbors, or, you know, try and somehow communicate the wishes. But anyway, that is my motion. I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Can I have a seconder for that motion? That's okay. Thank you, Director Marsh. That's a second.
I actually wonder if Director Yanni Darnita would consider an amendment.
It's up to the board or the committee to consider an amendment. What's your amendment?
It would be that we ask the North Cowichan and the city to also join in with a region-wide policy.
So that
I don't think it's fair that we let North Cowichan and the city do their own thing if we're asking Ladysmith and Lake Cowichan to be part of this. So I think it's clunky, but do you get what I'm trying to say?
Okay, so the amendment then would add within that bracketed section within CBRD electoral areas, Town of Ladysmith, Town of Lake Cowichan, North Cowichan, and City of Duncan. So the addition would be North Cowichan and City of Duncan. And
Yeah, I'm not sure how to word it.
Yeah, no, that's
Not sure how to word it when they're currently excluded from bylaw 39, North Cowichan and City of Duncan.
But the amendment would be to include them in the prohibition. I'm getting a nod from Ms. Harrison here that amendment is appropriate. So does somebody want to second that amendment? Okay.
Oh, I first did it. Sorry.
You can't move and second the same thing. Director Yanni DiNardo seconds. So discussion on the amendment to add City of Duncan and North Cowichan to the motion. Director Staples on the amendment.
I'm not sure if I should be speaking to the amendment or the motion. I don't have an issue with what's being proposed, but I still don't think it gets to there has to be a process in place. And that's the thing that I don't actually like about that option, is that there's no process to look at how we do this and creating that regional approach that option 3 gives. So I don't not support the amendment necessarily, but I don't believe that this is the right process that's going to get us to where we want to go.
Thank you, Director Staples. Any other comments on the amendment? Director Nicholson.
Yeah, I think Director Staples is correct. I would much prefer option 3 from a process perspective.
Thank you. So seeing no further hands, I'm going to call the question on the amendment. First of all, to add North Cowichan and Duncan to the main motion. All in favor? And opposed? Please keep your opposed hands up so Ms. Harrison can tally the... Are we good? Motion's defeated? That was my count. Okay, thank you. No problem. Okay, the amendment is defeated. Now back to the main motion, which is option 2, the prohibition, and adding the advocating with senior governments. Any discussion on the main motion? Director Yanni DiNardo.
Yes, I want to speak to, it was mentioned here already, the airshed that we've been working for so many years. And that was a process that we thought was going to be valuable. And I'm not sure that was either. And it is still a challenge. We've had the education. We know it's bad for the health. We've actually had that scientifically proven. We've got all the medical reports. And what was really needed, I feel, after all these years, was a ban. The 2 weeks and the 2 weeks have not worked. The air quality in Cowichan Bay is terrible. So, you know, I've seen different processes, and this can still be a process of education with this ban, still explaining and educating. It doesn't have to, because I honestly did not see, it'll take a lot of time, but in the meantime, it's been 14 years of poor air quality still. But I really feel that we can move this and also educate the public.
Thank you, Director Yanni DiNardo. Any further questions or any discussion, rather, on the main motion? I'm going to put myself on the list. I share some of the concerns that I've heard from others. While the long-term goal may be some kind of a ban, I don't think we're going to achieve that unless we do it regionally in consultation, not only with our municipal neighbors, but also our First Nations neighbors. If this motion is defeated, I do have a motion prepared that goes to option 3, but adds some wording with respect to further consultations than what's there right now. So I'll be voting against this, not because I don't support an outright ban, but I don't think we can get there by just declaring an outright ban. I think we need to do the work that's required regionally to get there. And this is a shortcut that I don't think will get us what we need. So with that, seeing no further, Director Salmon.
Yeah, thank you. So my concern about option 3 is that it punts it down the road and we don't end up actually getting anywhere. So I'm inclined to support this one. However, I'm also, I want to complicate, but I'm not sure if including Ladysmith and Town of Lake Cowichan is, I'm thinking more an interim step would be EA only. So I don't know whether I want to propose that amendment, if that would work, or I wouldn't mind hearing from Director Stone or McGonigal if that, well, I'll just try about, if I have a second, I'd like to propose that amendment to that if Director Yanni DiNardo's in favor.
Well, Director Yanni DiNardo doesn't have to be in favor. All you need is a seconder.
Yeah.
So you're proposing then that the motion be amended to make it read that bylaw 39 be amended to prohibit all fireworks within CVRD electoral areas and excluding First Nations reserves. So it would take out Town of Ladysmith and Town of Lake Cowichan?
Yes.
Okay. There's a seconder for that amendment? All right. On the amendment, I'll let Director Salmon speak first, then Director Stone.
Well, I just think it was simplified, and it is an interim step that wouldn't include the munis. That we'd leave that to them.
All right. Director Stone.
I just want to say that to the amendment, but also to the main motion. I don't think that the Town of Ladysmith is against, the moving away from fireworks as a celebration item. I think it's just that there's a transition that needs to take place, and there's a lot of other considerations that would be outside an outright ban. And to our electoral area representatives, I just think that we're creating an expectation that we're already not able to deliver on, and we're broadening that expectation. So I like option 3 better in terms of forwarding the discussion, but I also recognize that little would happen. But I definitely support the amendment so that we can work with our community on what we can do to mitigate the impacts of fireworks, but also work towards a transition away from them.
All right, Director, I think Staples had her hand up on this, and then Director Morrison. Director Staples.
Yeah, I mean, I would only support this in conjunction with option 3 as well. So I'm not sure, I mean, as 2 separate motions, or having this be part of option 3, that they're banned in the regional district, and that it would be recommended to the board, blah, blah, blah. And I'd like to hear Director Sebring's amendments to that as well. Because I think that those 2 things, if the regional district wants to start that ban and saying, we're going to ban this, we recognize all these other things are happening, and now we have this approach put in place that we can move towards, making this a regional ban, which I think is what the process speaks to. So it kind of does both of those things. I'm not sure. It just feels a bit clunky, maybe. Maybe it has to be clunky, and that's fine. But that's either I'd support this if there is a second motion that speaks to option 3, but I wouldn't feel comfortable supporting it if there wasn't. So I feel like I'm in a bit of a conundrum with that.
All right. Right now, we're just discussing the amendment to take out Town of Ladysmith and Town of Lake Cowichan, just to be clear.
I understand that, yeah, but that would make a ban in the regional district, right? But without option 3, I don't feel comfortable supporting that, is what I'm saying.
Fair enough. Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and clunky is an understatement. I think what I was hoping was going to ultimately end up happening was that we would look at option 3, and I was going to put forward an additional motion that the item be referred to the Electoral Area Services Committee as well. I think that there's more discussion to be had. We've already had electoral area directors express some concerns with an outright ban, and so I won't support the amendment, and I would support something along option 3 with the referral to EAS. Thank you.
Director Toporowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think I wouldn't call it clunky or anything. I just think that there is still some pieces that are missing from that motion. And I would support option 3 in regards to an example of how the CVRD approached Cowichan tribes in the water restrictions and how we got education. We all had those door hangers, everybody remembers them, about educating about the water restrictions. And I think this is another thing I think could move forward with the fireworks on educating people about this, and also spoke about earlier, a regional approach to how we address these. As we heard from one of the staff members, it's really hard to enforce. Police officers are arriving, to places and not finding the culprits, so to speak. I think, so moving towards, option 3, and but I won't support this one. Thanks.
Again, we're actually discussing the amendment here to take out Ladysmith and Lake Cowichan. I'd like to focus it on that. Director McGonigal, you had your hand up.
Thank you very much. And I think by adding removal of Lake Cowichan and the town of Ladysmith and First Nations contravenes the intent of the original motion of a total ban. So I couldn't support that either.
Okay. I'm going to call the question on the amendment unless I see anybody furiously waving their hand to speak to it. All in favor of the amendment? And opposed? The amendment is defeated. Thank you. So back to the main motion. Again, a total ban and continuing to lobby senior governments. Director Yanni DiNardo.
I believe that I heard from enforcement, Mr. McDonald, that it would be easier to have a total ban. I know, it's going to be difficult, but then it's without the permits and all of that, it would be easier. So people are saying it's going to be harder. I understood that it was going to be once there's a ban, it makes it much easier for enforcement. I mean, even though we're in a rural area, just like the speeding and the seatbelts, but still. Then at least it's clear.
Director Stone.
I think the evidence would point to that not being the case. If you look at where outright bans have been put in place, the reporting shows that it's been no easier to enforce and not made a measurable effect on the discharge of fireworks that are already illegal under our bylaws. So I appreciate different perspectives. I don't think anybody's changing their mind here, but I think practically speaking, this is a bit of folly.
Anybody else need to speak to the main motion before I call the question? Seeing no hands, I'm going to call the question. All in favor of the motion for option 2? All right, and opposed? Option 2 is defeated. With the consent of the committee, I would like to propose a slightly modified version of option 3. That it be recommended to the board that the chair of the CVRD board write a letter to all municipal councils and adjacent First Nations inviting their participation in the development of a regional approach to the regulation of the discharge and sale of fireworks in the Cowichan Valley Regional District. Can I have a seconder for that? Seconded by Director Stone. Oh, and Director Morrison just reminded me, can we add to that and that this issue be referred to the Electoral Area Services Commission or Committee? So consider that a friendly. Thank you. Director Stone seconds that as well. So discussion. We've beaten this up for some considerable time. Director McGonigal.
I think this is a step that is missing from the other two options, is the input and consultation with our surrounding neighbors and moving forward to a similar implementation as the water restrictions regulation. That was difficult to get there, but we eventually did. So I believe this is the right process.
Thank you. And Director Nicholson.
Yeah, I really appreciate this approach. I am hoping that once we find out whether the municipal councils and First Nations are interested in participating, that this will come back to us with a plan for how this will happen, because I do agree with the point that Director Yanni DiNardo brought up. The airshed collaboration has sort of, it has lacked, I think, clear leadership and timelines. So I think that we need to make sure that that is not the case with this one. Thank you.
All right, any other hands? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question on the motion. All in favor? And opposed? Director Yanni DiNardo is opposed. The motion carries. With the consent of the committee, it's 10:45. I'm going to suggest a 10-minute recess. We will resume at 10:55 to take up the last item, which I suspect will also engender some interesting discussion. Director Stone.
Mr. Chair, I may just be a couple minutes late coming back, closer to 11 o'clock, but I'll do my best to get back here as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is item R4, which is a report from Director Nicholson regarding reducing barriers to the participation of parents as elected officials. And there is a two-part recommendation. Would you like me to read it?
Please do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation before you is that it be recommended to the board, number one, that a policy on maternity and parental leave for electoral area directors be prepared, and number two, that staff report on options to provide electoral area directors with a childcare benefit or stipend to support attendance at scheduled CVRD board, committee, and commission meetings.
Thank you very much. Director Nicholson, this is your report. I'll give you the lead, and if you'd like to make the motion, if you can get a seconder, we can get it on the table.
Yes, I'd like to make the motion.
Do we have a seconder? Director Marsh seconds. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. So the motivation for this is really boards work, or representatives of the community work best when we reflect the community, and I think that there's a barrier currently for younger parents to participate as elected officials, which the first part of the motion is about a policy on maternity and parental leave for electoral area directors, and I believe that that is really a housekeeping issue because the Employment Standards Act provides for that, and the problem is the municipal provincial regulations don't speak to that, so we are really forced to clarify it in our own regional district regulations. So that is a housekeeping thing. The second part of the motion is about childcare allowance, which is perhaps a little bit more of a novel approach to helping young parents who participate, because I think at the present time our remuneration is not a lot for the amount of time that we are putting in, and the demands are growing. And I think that if you end up spending most of what you make on childcare, that is a disincentive to participate. And I really feel very strongly that our democratic process works best when we are constantly attracting new people and rejuvenating the board so that new thinking and new energy and good decision making can happen. And so I am putting forward this motion and hope you will support it.
Thank you, Director Nicholson. I have a point of process question for Ms. Harrison. I'm not sure what the procedure is here at the regional district. I know at my municipality, if anybody wants to sever a motion like this, you just make the request and it's automatic. How do we handle that here? Because I'd like to sever these two, numbers 1 and 2. How can that be done?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Generally, it's done before the recommendation is read out. We've had a motion to move both 1 and 2. You could pass a motion to pull one of them, and we could vote on that to actually pull it from the combined 1 and 2.
All right. So is that an amendment or is that just a poll?
It's a poll.
And then number 2 comes back later.
To be considered after number 1?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the consent of the board, I'd like to make that motion because I really think these are 2 separate issues and we need to discuss them separately. Can I have a seconder to pull number 1 for discussion initially? Thank you for that, Director Wilson. Just on the question of pulling number 1, basically separating out the motions. Any discussion on that? Seeing none. Director Acton.
Well, I was going to bring up the topic of remuneration, period. I think if we're going to look at these 2 things, we should be looking at the remuneration as well, because we're trying, it's just a small Band-Aid on a huge issue. So
I believe
I
that.
guess it could be a motion after this, after we're completely done. Thank you.
I believe that would be a separate motion. So on the question of separating out 1 and 2, pulling number 1 for discussion initially, I'm going to call the question. Are we all in favor of doing that? Those opposed? Director Acton is opposed. That motion carries. So the discussion for now will be the policy on maternity and parental leave for electoral area directors, that such a policy be prepared. Director McGonigal, I had you on the list. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think this, as Director Nicholson has said, is a matter of housekeeping on our policies and coinciding with the Employment Standards Act. We have seen examples in other municipalities where this has not been in place, and there have been some struggles for parental leave, etc. So I would be in full support of this moving forward.
Director Wilson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do fully understand the motivation and intent for this report, but I have to respectfully disagree. In the past, I have spoken glowingly, and I'm biased, of my daughter, who is an RN at the one of the hospitals down in Victoria. She works in the emergency and critical care transport areas, and she works a minimum of 48 hours every 4 days, sometimes 60 hours. Any RN, regardless of their department, works these long hours, surrounded by trauma and everything else that goes with that job. None of them have this kind of benefit. I would love to see it brought in for somebody like that. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure if somebody in those positions can't get this kind of benefit, why should we should be extending it to somebody.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
All right, I'm speaking against it. Sorry, go ahead, Mr. McDonald.
I believe the discussion is on the policy, not the second portion.
Yep, that was
my mistake. I'll come back to it. I apologize for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wilson. Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd first of all really like to thank Director Nicholson for bringing this forward. And given that elected people cannot collect unemployment insurance when if they were to take parental leave, because we just don't seem to be like all the other human beings in the province on a number of fronts. I think this is a really good thing to have, and I'm fully in support. And I really, again, thank you to Director Nicholson for taking the initiative.
Director Martman.
Thank you. And, I read this report and at first light, I thought, wow, it's interesting to find ways to support people in certain circumstances. And there could be many other circumstances that people need support in during, the length of a job that you take on. The question I have, and I don't know if this is staff or question or who can answer this, but I'm trying to understand whether elected officials actually fall under the BC Employment Standards Act, and if anybody has expertise on that.
I see somebody else has popped up. Go ahead, Ms. Mohan.
Thank you. Through the chair to Director Martman. No, the elected officials aren't covered under the Employment Standard Act in this respect, and I believe that that is the reason why Director Nicholson has tabled this policy, is because they are not covered. So they're not currently entitled to this kind of leave because they're not considered employees. However, that this report is pointing out that that could be a barrier to someone running for office or holding office if there wasn't a mechanism for them to have an approved leave for a maternity or parental leave, and then suggesting that compensation during that leave would mimic or mirror what is afforded through employment insurance for maternity leaves.
Thank you, Ms. Mohan. Director Martman, follow up.
Sorry about that. As a follow-up, then, any background to why that is the case, why the Employment Standard Act doesn't consider us, or directors or elected officials, to be employed?
Through the chair to Director Martman, I can't talk about why, but I can speak to the fact that there are significant differences in terms of the relationship that an elected official has with the organization versus the relationship that an employee has with the organization. And most employment law won't apply to the relationship between an elected official and the organization. So an employee-employer relationship is a type of contractual relationship with obligations and rights on both sides. And a lot of those things just don't apply to the relationship between elected officials and the organizations.
I'll give you an example, Director Martman. If an employee of the organization violates a bullying and harassment policy, they're subject to sanction by HR, and if the behavior continues for long enough, they're subject to dismissal. HR does not have the power to dismiss elected officials. That power rests exclusively with the voters. I mean, that's really the sort of fundamental distinction, and that sort of stretches through a whole bunch of employment-related law touching on this. Dr. Martin.
I would add that the very mechanism by which an elected official holds office and then either leaves office or is voted out of office is completely different than the mechanism by which an employer hires an employee and then has some rights to terminate employment under certain conditions, et cetera. So
I'm
fundamental differences.
I'm pretty sure HR wouldn't have hired me. Director Martin.
So I have another question, but maybe others want to speak first, or should I? Up to you, Chair.
I'm not seeing any other hands, so I'll let you proceed. I do have Director Morrison and Staples, but I'll give you one more, Director Martin.
Thank you. And so I guess the next question is around process, because I feel uncomfortable voting for something that gives us benefits or added compensation without a process. And I would want to, I guess, understand what is best practice in addressing deficits in benefits or compensation moving forward to make a objective, evidence-based decision. So that's my question. Thanks.
Okay, the motion is that a policy on maternity and parental leave for electoral area directors be prepared. And I think part of that policy will address the process piece, and it'll come back to the committee or the board for further discussion. Director Morrison, Staples, and then Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and not meaning to muddy the waters, and I certainly don't have any particular knowledge or expertise in this area, but I'm just curious, like, we are definitely not employees, and I wonder about the different aspects. Like, I do know that these parental leave can be applied to individuals that are adopting, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm also questioning the issue around elder care or end-of-life care. Is there a policy in the Employment Standards Act around that are considerations? I'm not saying we should do it, but we're preparing a report, and if there is information around that, is that something that would be contained in the report? I'm not saying we have to bring forward a policy on that, but is that the type of information that may come forward if this resolution were to pass?
So you're talking a sort of compassion policy as well. I would turn to Ms. Mohan, as she'd be the one probably writing this report. Ms. Mohan.
through the chair to Director Morrison, I think this would actually be a report that I would assign to the incoming HR manager. But given that that's the role that I've just recently held, I can tell you that there are a number of forms of protected leaves under employment standards, and family responsibility leave is one of them. So I think that it would be quite a very detailed and comprehensive report if you were to ask the HR manager to like go through the Employment Standards Act and find all of the parallel, you know what I mean, possible parallel leaves that you might want to include in a policy for elected officials. So I wouldn't recommend that. I would recommend dealing with these items singly to start. With respect to best practice, I don't know that any other local government has this kind of policy yet for its elected officials, although I haven't done any research on that. So we could advise in a report on best practices, or at least what might be discovered in among other local governments. So while Employment Standards Act doesn't apply to elected officials because they're not employees, there are other forms of legislation that typically cover employees for which there is some coverage for elected officials. So things like WorkSafe BC or human rights legislation. And so different forms of human rights accommodation may be covered under that legislation, but not under employment standards legislation. So yeah, it's a bit of a patchwork of what elected officials get covered by and what they don't.
But just to be clear, the motion that's before us is confined to maternity and parental leave, period, full stop. So this report, if it comes back, or this proposed policy, if it comes back, wouldn't extend to the rest of that patchwork, correct? You're muted, ma'am, but I saw you nodding your head. All right, Director Staples, then Smith.
Sorry, through the chair, if that question was for me,
Yes,
I wasn't sure. Yeah, my understanding is that this would be to direct just on the maternity and parental leave benefit, that alone. So yeah.
All right. Director Staples, then Smith.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that it should actually just stick to, you know, the question at hand and not add additional things. I think that this is something that for a long time has been overlooked. And I think it's been overlooked because there simply has not been, you know, if you look in the past when all of these things were created under the Local Government Act, there was not a strong contingent of women that were even involved. If I walk out into the hallway in the gallery at City Hall, there is 100 years of men on the wall. And when this came up at UBCM in 2016, when it was brought up by the Sooke mayor, Maya Tate, who had taken maternity leave and whose council did try to use the legislation that currently exists to try to remove her from her position and from her committees that she was on. There was a number of different things that they had been trying to do when she was off. It demonstrated two things to me at that time. One was that this hadn't come up because it had never been an issue because of, I'm assuming, the lack of pregnant women that were involved in local politics for many, many years. And now that it was a question, it was surprising to me that it would even be a discussion. It should just be something, you know, to promote equality. This year, or this last election, was the first time on Vancouver Island that we had, I believe it was just over 50% of representation from women. That is high. The rest of the province is much lower. And so, you know, this does primarily affect women, some men, but primarily women. And we're in you know, 2022. This should just be something that should have been resolved, I believe, by the province when the UBCM put that motion forward in 2016 and was not. I know that New Westminster certainly is looking at doing something similar, and other jurisdictions, I'm not sure if any actually have. But I think that this is a really, you know, I just really appreciate Director Nicholson for bringing this to our attention, because we should all ensure that this is part of our policies at our local governments for the future. Having two young people, younger women on our council, I just, you know, they both bring so much and the diversity that we need and where we're trying to move towards, I think this is a really strong step.
Thank you, Director Staples. I've got Director Smith. I saw somebody else's hand, but I wasn't sure who. Director Yana DiNardo as well. Director Smith.
Thank you. This is an interesting topic. Councils are very different than electoral areas. An electoral area has one director that's elected, and the replacement would be an unelected alternate that most likely did not sign on to take a year's work on during the term. So it does bring into question the difference between a municipality and an electoral area. I appreciate the intent. I also have concerns about those that then have elder care required or a family member that they must care for. We're stepping into a plate where we should investigate everything and not just one area. It's great to see the younger people stepping forward. I'm working with my Parks Commission to bring in more younger families because they reflect a totally different value and change for your community. These are very important volunteers to include. But I think we need to look at this from, if municipalities are, maybe this is a municipality issue, and because electoral areas are different, it may need a different conversation there. Thank you. Maybe Ms. Mohan could speak to how exactly electoral areas would be dealing with this. Thank you.
Director Smith, before we go to Ms. Mohan, I would remind you that the motion before us is that a policy on maternity and parental leave for electoral area directors be prepared. Municipal directors aren't even included, so this is specific to that. Director Mohan, Ms. Mohan, do you have anything to add?
Just a minute. I was saying that maybe it was misinterpreted. What I did say is that we are different and we need to look at this differently for both areas. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Mohan.
Municipalities sit at this table and make decisions, so we need to look at it for many angles. Thank you.
All right.
To the chair, I'm not sure there was a question in there for me specifically. I think that what Director Smith was asserting is that the mechanism to backfill a electoral area director on leave is different than it would be for a municipal director, and I think she's right in that regard. But I don't really have anything to comment or advise about that. So.
All right, Director Yana DiNardo, and then I'm going to put myself on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a policy to be prepared. Once again, I'm going to say the modernized word again, because we need to modernize, because we are working on modernization. It is important. And I know that equity has been a issue in some of our meetings, even the equity. And I'd like to say diversity of every kind, not just for women. It should be in all local governments. So this is a policy being prepared, and then we can look at it then. The EAs, that is a very important point, that they would have an alternate representing the community that is unelected. So that is interesting, an interesting point as well. So I'll wait to see, and if this passes, that they see what the policy looks like. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Yana DiNardo. Director Nicholson to close in a minute, but I want to stick myself on the list here. I'm strongly in favor of this particular motion. It's kind of an anomaly that elected officials are not covered under employment standards. If you look at the Local Government Act and the Community Charter, if you miss, I think, 4 meetings consecutively without some kind of board consent or approval, you actually lose your seat at the table. And, I'm sorry, but when you have somebody that has either, their own child or an adopted child coming into the family or whatever it is, 4 meetings is 2 months. That just doesn't cut it. and you know, to just quietly as a board say, yeah, okay, we'll give you the leave, that still to me doesn't really cut it, because it doesn't recognize the work that the alternate director has to do in the absence of the elected officials. So I think a policy in this regard is needed. I think it's probably a very good idea to put something together, and I look forward to seeing what staff puts together, assuming the motion passes. Director Kuhn, you haven't spoken yet.
Well, whoever suggested that elder care should be included, I would agree with it. I think what we're trying to do here with covering children, it's kind of a patchwork. If we want to look at compensating for any, let's say, unforeseen event within family, then certainly elder care should be included. And I think that would involve a whole different ballgame. And I would be much in favor of doing then an overview of everything, rather than just doing this patchwork. And then who knows, maybe in a year later, half a year later, somebody else will come up and say, well, just a minute, how about elder care? And then we'll patch that again. And I just can't see doing that small little steps. If we want to deal with that kind of thing, let's look at the overall problem. Thank you.
Ms. Harrison suggests that perhaps the elder care thing might be covered under the word parental. Not only are you getting leave to be a parent, but you might also be getting leave to look after a parent. That's just, she whispered that in my ear over here. But Ms. Mohan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to comment on what I believe is a key distinction between this this proposal of Director Nicholson's and other provisions under Employment Standard Act. So maternity and parental leave is a particular kind of leave under employment standards, which then makes someone eligible for employment insurance. And in this case, because elected officials are not employees, they're not eligible for that employment insurance. So other kinds of leaves under the Act, things like family responsibility leave. I believe the other is compassionate care leave for attending to someone who's gravely ill and near end of life. Those leaves, I believe, under employment standards are not necessarily paid leaves, although they must be, the time off must be given, but they're not necessarily, there are different programs for compensation for those kinds of leaves. Sick leave is another one. Sick leave is not, there's no mandate under employment standards to provide paid sick leave, although that just recently changed. But there is medical EI. So if you're on an approved sick leave, then there's an opportunity for someone to apply for a bit of income replacement under medical EI. So I think that that's important to keep in mind, that family responsibility leave, compassionate care leave, as far as I'm aware, are currently still unpaid leaves under employment standards, whereas the maternity and parental leave make you eligible for employment insurance. And that's significant because in this case, there's a proposal here to provide earnings replacement to a certain level.
Director Kuhn, I just want to come back to you. I mean, the motion as it's envisioned right now does not cover what you were talking about. You're welcome to try to make an amendment, and if you can get a seconder, we can discuss it. I'm not sure. My sense is that would be supported, but I just want to give you an opportunity if you want to go there. You don't. Okay, thank you. Director Marsh. I see you, Director Nicholson.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out that for an electoral area director, 4 meetings isn't 2 months, it's 1 month. And so if anyone's thinking about that, they're meeting every week as a committee and as members of the board. The other thing, I hear what people are saying about leave to care for a sick family member, whether it's a parent or a spouse with cancer or an adult child with cancer or whatever. I think that's a little bit more complicated and would require a pretty deep dive for our staff. And I would suggest we leave that to the next board if they want to take it up. And the reason I'm saying it would require so much is it's very individual. If you're the only person that could care for that person in your family, that's one thing. But most families have several siblings and partners, and you get where I'm going. So anyway, yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Director Marsh, just to be clear, it's 4 consecutive board meetings, not board and committee meetings. So not to belabor the point, but it is 2 months. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I'd like to make 2 points. One is that I was really focused on what we could do to remove barriers for younger people to participate in local government as elected officials. So that was really the motivation behind this motion. And the second point is that I am really hoping that people from the municipalities, if you are supportive of this, and if this does pass, I'm hoping that you will take this back to your councils and build on the work of the regional district. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not quite sure how we do that because we don't have an alternate structure in place. So if somebody asks for leave at a municipal level, we just give them leave and we pay them. So Director Nicholson, sorry.
Well, just to follow up, there was an article in the Citizen, I think just this past week, about a North Saanich councillor who has had to take leave because she is all of a sudden adopting a child. And fortunately, North Saanich does have this policy in place, so they were okay with all that happening. And a few other municipalities have gone down that road, so I'm really hoping that North Cowichan does as well.
Thank you. Seeing no further hands, I'm going to call the question on the main motion. All in favor? And opposed? That carries. To another process question, Ms. Harrison, the second part of the motion, we pulled the first part. The motion was made in toto as 1 and 2. Is part 2 still on the table, or do we have to remove it? Remove, not remove. Do we need another motion?
Yeah, you would need a new motion for number 2.
I would need a new motion for number 2, so I'm going to assume Director Nicholson will move number 2, and Director Marsh will once again second. So now we'll have our discussion on point 2, which is that staff report on options to provide electoral area directors with a child care benefit or stipend to support attendance at scheduled CVRD board, committee, and commission meetings. That's the motion that's now on the table. Who wants to speak first? I think we'll give it to Director Nicholson. It's her motion, then we'll go to Wilson. Go ahead, Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I think I've spoken to this. I think it's basically to remove a barrier that would be a disincentive for younger parents to think about running for elected office, because childcare expenses are significant, and the amount of time that the real problem, I think, with elected officials is we have these meeting schedules that are sort of regular, but they tend to be very irregular in practice. So it's very difficult to, I think, arrange basic childcare for those things. So anything that can be anything that can help make that a smoother sailing so they can participate fully I think would be appreciated.
Thank you. Director Wilson and Marsh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a bit I'm concerned, first of all, about staff time, because we're constantly hearing that they are very stretched at the moment. But I don't understand how we could even vote on this, because you can't have a policy being prepared without the input from the staff. So one goes with the other, surely. So I'm at a loss to understand how one doesn't affect the other. So basically, we can't have a staff report without the thingy. Do you see what I'm trying to say here? Maybe not.
I'm really unclear what you're trying to say. And this just asks for a staff report on some options for child care benefit or stipend. It's a separate issue from the first motion.
It is, but how can we prepare a policy on that without a staff report and time?
We're not preparing a policy. We're looking at options for this one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Director Marsh, then Acton, and then
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Searing. I support this, and I would be looking to see potential inclusion of the hybrid model going forward, since we have it all set up, because perhaps a parent would be able to be at part of a meeting and have a childcare person come in when the child's no longer napping, or there's all kinds of different options. And then I would just end by saying, I don't think this necessarily has to be done or completed in the next month, because we don't currently have anyone on this board that I expect is of childbearing age. So I think there would be time to have this done, and I think it's really, really important, and for all the reasons that Director Nicholson stated in the beginning, and also Mayor Staples, both of them so eloquently, about the equity of young parents being able to have a voice at local tables, because us boomers, which you're not all quite boomers, but most of us are, we are the ones that have created this mess, whether we knew it or not, with climate change and the kind of crazy way we run our economic system. And these are the people that are inheriting it and are going to have to try and fix it. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Marsh, Director Acton, Staples, Canada DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was unsure about some of the previous comments, but I would politely disagree that we're not allowing. I really appreciate Director Nicholson. Sorry, I'm not having my thoughts very organized. Director Nicholson's motion to allow for a younger demographic to represent our communities. I can speak for myself. I'm 51, and when I first started in this role, it was 5.5 years ago, and my youngest was still not old enough to be left alone at home. And I was the alternate, so an acclaimed director. So for those 6 months, I was actually costing me money to be in this role, because it certainly wasn't even close to covering my childcare expenses. Because as an electoral area director, and I'll point out that I was the youngest, and being 51 doesn't actually give us a big representation of the community. I'll fast forward to once elected. I was in that first year, I was spending 100% of my stipend on childcare. We were expected to go to commission meetings on Monday evenings, Tuesday evenings sometimes, community meetings, directors meetings, and then our committee meetings and board meetings. So it was not possible any other way than for me to spend 100% of my salary. So luckily, he started to get a little older, and his siblings were almost old enough to be responsible for some of those short meetings. And I probably ended up spending about half for a year or two after that. So, and then I explained this at AVICC to someone, and you know what their comment was? Well, that was your choice. And I just don't think that's good enough, that someone like myself had to, sure, it was my choice, and I did make that choice, but I don't think somebody should have to, because that is putting up a huge barrier and a message that we're not supporting families and supporting a different representation around the table. And I really appreciate Director Staples pointing out some younger women on their council, and they have great perspectives, and young and vibrant and energetic. And not that we don't get those kind of perspectives from older generations as well, but I just think anything that we can do to encourage and to support women and younger families to be able to participate, I think, is a win for us and for the whole community. Thank you.
Good. Staples, Yana DiNardo, and Markman, and then McGonigal. Director Staples and Smith.
To add to what Director Acton was just saying, when I first started this as well, my son was only 7 years old and I was a single mother. And I lived in a co-housing situation. So there were times that I had childcare, and because our meetings are often at night, there are often times that I wasn't unable to find childcare and had to, childcare that I didn't have to contribute to. And at that time, it was $10 an hour for childcare. And that doesn't include the childcare when you do have to go away somewhere for whether it's for conferences or other things. And so it is. There's a lot of costs associated with that when you have young children. And I feel like that kind of conversation of, you're making this choice to do this. I don't think that should be part of the conversation anymore. I think that it's something that we want to invite is the contribution of whether it's, male or female parents, although this does often more definitely fall onto women. The cost of childcare to keep that demographic of people out, simply because there are these additional barriers, and there should be some way of finding something that would work to compensate for that, because it's a huge loss to our tables without those voices. And one of the things that I really appreciate about my council is the diversity that we do have in both age and gender. And we have people in their 20s and we have people in their 70s and everyone in between. And it makes for really good discussion and really great perspectives. And there's learning that goes back and forth between generations, and that's really important when making decisions for a lot of reasons. So I feel that just trying to alleviate some of the barriers, and this is one barrier, coming up with something that's fair and reasonable. I'd really like to see that there are, again, other places that have done and are working on things like this. I know at UBCM and AVICC before COVID, for a number of years, they finally had, because there were so many younger people that had run, they did have daycare available at some of the conferences, and it did make a huge difference in participation. And these are important considerations. And as Director Jan DiNardo said, this is about modernizing. Things are changing, and we have to change with them. And as Director Atkins said, stipends for elected officials in many jurisdictions are not keeping up with the cost of living. And we don't want to alienate people if there's ways that we can help until we can level out some of the stipends. So I would support this and look forward to seeing what staff would bring back.
Thank you, Director. I'm sorry?
No, it's okay.
All right. Director Jan DiNardo, you've already spoken on this, so with your consent, I'm going to move you a little further down the list because we haven't heard from either Martman, McGonigal, or Smith so far. Director Martman.
Thank you. And much like the previous one, I would like to see if someone can speak a little bit to the affordable child care benefit. And a little bit more about, are there criteria under that? Because this seems to be sort of a blanket. If you have a kid or something, we'll give you a child care allowance. I'm curious what it is underneath the affordable benefits. What are the different criteria that they look at?
Are there criteria? I guess we would go to Ms. Mohan for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Director Martman. I actually I don't have any knowledge of this act particularly because at the CVRD for employees, we don't have any form of childcare benefit for our employees, not through policy, not through the collective agreement. So I'm not familiar with what the criteria are for the affordable childcare benefit.
I mean, there is the $10 a day daycare that's kind of the province is trying to roll out. Is that what you're talking about, Director Martman, or are you looking at something statutory? Because I don't know that anything exists. I could be wrong.
No, I'm looking specifically at what was in the document provided under childcare expenses. BC has it quotes BC has an affordable childcare benefit, and what precludes an elected official from accessing that.
I'll go to the author of the report for that one, Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I phoned the province about this because I was interested, and nothing precludes an elected official from applying for the affordable child care benefit. But it is a minimal amount that is provided, and it is really focused on income, family size, and type of care. So it's a sort of a moving. Their criteria are drive how much money you get. And when I looked at it and figured it out, it seemed that even with the amount of money that we are currently provided, you would not get enough funding for one child to cover very much of your childcare costs if you require childcare costs to attend meetings.
Thank you. As follow-up?
Go ahead, sir.
And I think this is really an important feature, is that a benefit does exist at the provincial level. Also, that both provincially and federally, there's initiatives to provide childcare, affordable childcare, and that we are asking an employer, which is quite frankly, I look at us as being employed by the community, to say, well, we think this would be something that we should have covered or be provided as a benefit to a director. I guess the piece that I have is that if you have this being provided at both provincial and federal levels, or initiatives that will be there, I'm uncomfortable turning to the community to say we should have this as well when we don't actually offer it for any of our employees at the CVRD. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Martman. I've got McGonigal, Smith, Morrison. Then I'm going to put myself on the list, and Toporowski and Marsh. Okay, Director McGonigal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do understand the noble intent of the motion coming forward, and I understand the lack of diversity within elected boards and bodies. But at the end of the day, it comes down to these benefits being offloaded to taxpayers, which we already argue constantly are overburdened with taxation. If we're going to look at childcare, we should be looking at loss of wages for gentlemen who miss employment to attend meetings. I believe it's opening a possible complex issue. I would agree with Director Acton that the remuneration part be the subject where these be broached. I respect Director Nicholson for bringing both points forward, and I did support the original one in the policy, but I could not support this addition to child care benefits at this time without having a fuller, wholesome discussion on a remuneration entity.
Thank you, Director McGonigal. Director Smith, Morrison, then myself, Toporowski, and then we're back to Yana DiNardo and Marsh. Director Smith.
Hello, I think most of my points have been brought forward at this time. Thank you.
All right, Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm perfectly happy to see a report come forward. I just think that we're dancing around the issue that we've already taken heat for in the community, and that's the level of compensation directed for electoral area directors. In my travels at UBCM and AVICC, many jurisdictions have realigned their compensation policies. There's jurisdictions much smaller than ours, much smaller populations that have surpassed us, and we haven't addressed this in what I think is about 8 years. So my question is for the committee, when are we going to take this on? I certainly hope we make a decision before the end of the term. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to put myself on the list here. Like many others, I appreciate Director Nicholson bringing this forward, and like Director McGonigal, I was 100% in support of Bullet 1. I can't support Bullet 2. I mean, we've seen some of the emails, and I don't generally react to emails, but there was something that I saw in one of the emails we received on this that that kind of struck me. And it, notwithstanding the point of diversity and that we need to attract, younger folks, what other employer in the Cowichan Valley provides a child care benefit or stipend to support somebody's attendance at work? And why are we entitled to something special? Because that is how this is being perceived in some sectors of the community as, oh, there's those damn politicians with their entitlements again. I totally agree with Director Morrison. We do need to readdress this question of compensation, particularly in the context of the electoral area directors. And like him, I'm hoping that we bring this forward, and perhaps somebody will make a motion that we bring this forward to a committee of the whole meeting upcoming. I don't know. Whatever that process looks like, we need to address compensation. This is part of compensation. But to single this out as a benefit that, frankly, nobody else in our community gets, and further to what Director Martin was saying, that there are some federal and provincial tools in place as well to deal with this, I just cannot support this kind of policy specifically for us. I think it reeks of entitlement, and I'm sorry, but that's how I fear it'll be read in community. I think we need to look much more broadly at the compensation piece, and maybe this is part of the compensation piece, but beyond that, I can't support this. Director Toporowski, then I know Director Yandinor has been waiting a long time to get back on the list. Director Toporowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the staff report, I support a staff report being made up to bring forward some options or something for us to think about. I do look at the barriers and to go to a more inclusive board all the way around, all across. I think this is a move in the right direction to look at options for younger members, male, female, to be able to participate fully at the table without worrying about, who's looking after your children and all those different things. If that makes any sense. But anyway, I think, we'll talk about remuneration, how much we get paid, like the CVRD directors get to sit at this table. Doesn't equal the amount of what the CVRD staff get paid, the benefits that come with that. Again, we look at EI. Pension is pretty small. Like, again, I spoke to one of the elder members that retired from Cowichan Tribes, and when he retired, and he'd been sitting at the table for a very long time, and looking at the pension that he was able to get out of that, it was just, like he said, wasn't very much. The other thing that I think about is if we, look at the comments that came in through emails and whatnot about our remuneration. I'm not saying it right, but the raises that we're looking at for CVRD directors to get going forward. Also, BC does not recognize this as a job, so would they qualify for the benefit for the childcare? So I'm just going there for a moment. Don't cut me off, Chair.
No, go ahead.
But I like for us to be in this position, it's not for fame and glory, and it's for our community. We put ourselves out there. We put ourselves out there in all sorts of ways, and to make this more comfortable for a more diverse participation and making it equal at this table, I think this is a really good thing to move forward on having. So just my thoughts.
I'm here for, I'm all about the fame and glory. I'm kidding. Just for clarification, Director Toporowski raises the issue of pensions, and before somebody in the public gets the wrong impression, there is no pension attached to either a CVRD board position or a municipal council position. We have no pensions. I just want to be clear. Maybe there's a small pension at Cowichan Tribes, but we don't have it here.
A point of clarification, Chair.
Yes, Director Martman.
Everybody pays Canada pension.
Yeah, okay. But, okay, fair enough. All right, Director Yana DiNardo, then Marsh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I've been working, I'm supportive of the $10 a day childcare for a lot of years now, but I think that I won't be supportive of this recommendation because I've seen at CVRD as well, all of the years I've been there, and so many young women that have gone on maternity leave. I feel that if we expand our building, the Cowichan, the CVRD building, that there should be a child care center in that for staff, and then it could be utilized for directors and politicians as well. But that's in the future, but I don't think it should be lost either, because I think it would benefit a lot of away time and pressure on a lot of the young workers that have put in time with us, and it's been a challenge. So I'm just speaking to future, but not now. But I'm hoping that that will be something that will happen in our community later.
Thank you, Director Yana DiNardo. Director Marsh, and then Staples.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things I wanted to point out. There is an inequity on this board, in my opinion. As a municipal director, I believe I make more than half of what electoral area directors make, and I don't have to go to commission meetings in the evening. I don't have to communicate with, I'm not the only person in my area that communicates with citizens. So there's already an inequity, and yes, we should deal with that. I hope we have the courage to deal with that for EAC directors. I think municipal directors are adequately compensated for their time here. But what I want to point out is we have a younger woman, she's young to us, who has said to us in her first year and a half, I believe she said, she didn't even get any of her stipend because it all went to childcare. Yes, Canada is now getting behind the $10 a day childcare. BC has had it for several years, but it's not available to everybody because they don't have centers that provide it to everybody. And it's also during the day. So I heard a couple of directors, mainly Director Acton, but I know all of the area directors have evening meetings that they meet with their commissions and their all these things. And so that low-cost childcare is not available to them at that time. Those places close at 5 or 6 o'clock, and those meetings start subsequent to that. And when we hear from the public, like, this is a very unique role. We are, in a sense, representing the employer, which is the public. But, you know, I don't take my cue from half a dozen people that are against something. I take my cue more about what society in general is leaning towards. And clearly, with the elections at the provincial and federal level, which platforms were on childcare, society who's getting out to vote is in favor of this. And frankly, I feel really sad for Mayor Staples, who just think about this. If Mayor Staples had not been in a co-op situation, think of all of the things that we wouldn't have here. If she hadn't been able to run, we wouldn't have housing for many homeless. There's so many things that this woman has brilliantly brought that she could not have had she not been in a certain living situation when she was able to run. And we don't know who else is out there, brilliant men or young men or women, who could do that with this tiny little drop of amount of money that it will be, and that will show up in the report. And so all we're asking for is a report And I think that, I hope that we just get the report, see what the options are. And I also agree that this is the time to look at compensation, but that's a separate motion. So, yeah, I just feel badly, and I want to thank both Director Acton and Mayor Staples for the many hundreds of hours they've contributed for and gone in the hole to do it, actually. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Your camera is off. I think you may have accidentally hit the camera that flipped it to the, there you go. Now you're back. No, you're not. You just disappeared completely. You got to turn the video on, but you're using the wrong camera. There's two cameras on your unit. You gotta switch.
I didn't change my camera, sir, so someone's going to have to walk me through how to get back.
I believe that Director.
Oh, you know what? I put my notes in
There we
front of
are.
my camera.
You're back. Thank you.
There you go. Duh.
All right. Seeing no further hands, I'm going to call the question on the motion. All in favor? And opposed? Smith? Motion carries? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Ms. Harrison, next on the agenda.
Excuse me.
Yes? Sorry, somebody had to excuse me.
I do my number 3.
I'm sorry?
I wanted staff to also bring back the electoral area director's remuneration package. We have done all the work for that to come back for consideration at the board.
Do you want that to come to the board or committee of the whole? Take it
I think it should go to the board.
straight to the board. All right. So then a motion that the matter of director compensation be brought, that a report on the matter of director compensation be report be brought back to a future board meeting, correct? All right,
Yes,
that's the
report
motion.
that we've already done all the work for.
And
Thank
it's
you.
seconded. And Director Martman?
Thank you. Before I can vote on it, I kind of have to get a bit of background on what is all the work, quote unquote.
Director Morrison, you were quite involved in this. Maybe you can do a little bit of
I think
background.
Director Atkin, I think we can easily provide him with all the information. It's not that old and, well, it's actually getting out of date, but all the information is there.
All right. I'm going to call the question on that motion. All in favor? And opposed? Carries. Thank you. Now, Ms. Harrison, next item on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is unfinished business. There is none. New business, there is none. Question period, we have no applications. Closed session, there is none. Adjournment.
All right. There being no further business on the agenda, I'm going to declare the meeting adjourned at 11:56 a.m. We'll see you all at